The funeral had left me hollow. My grandmother's house, once bursting with warmth and laughter, now smelled of cold wood and mildew. I had returned, heart heavy and hopeful, expecting at least a fraction of her love to survive in the form of her inheritance, the tangible proof that she had trusted me, that she had known I would care for her legacy. Instead, all I found was betrayal. The envelope lay on the kitchen table, stark against the chipped formica. The lawyer's neat handwriting spelled my doom. My parents had claimed everything. Every dollar, every antique, every painting she had painstakingly collected over decades. I sank into the worn armed chair my grandmother had adored, staring at the faded floral fabric, wondering how I could have been so blind. They hadn't just taken money, they had taken pieces of her life, and with them, a part of me. I wandered through the house like a ghost. Each room was cluttered with memories, yet the air felt heavier than the grief I carried. Dust motes floated in slanted sunlight, settling on objects that once gleamed under her care. On the mantel, a cracked photograph of my grandmother smiled back at me, a cruel reminder that she was gone, and with her, any chance I had to prevent this theft. The music box on her dresser caught my attention. Its delicate ballerina spun with a creak, a sound that seemed louder in the silence. My fingers traced the tiny scratches on its surface, and I felt tears sting my eyes. How could my own parents, people I had trusted without question, do this to me? Did their love for money outweigh the bond of family? My chest ached with the knowledge that I had been left with nothing but a house on the brink of collapse, a home my grandmother had poured herself into, now reduced to a fragile shell. I didn't know where to begin. The walls groaned with age, the ceiling sagged as if mourning alongside me. Windows refused to close properly, letting in drafts that whispered through the empty rooms. The garden was overgrown, weeds choking out the roses she had tended to every spring. Everything screamed neglect, yet I felt an odd determination rising in me. This house, as broken as it was mine, or at least it should be. The knock on the door startled me. A man in a faded blue uniform stood on the porch, tool bag in hand. The repairman, hired to assess the damage to the house, gave a polite nod. His eyes were sharp, observant, as though he could see more than the physical decay. I explained the leaks, the broken cabinets, the uneven floors, and he listened without judgment. I expected only mundane questions about plumbing or wiring, but there was something else in his demeanor, a quiet caution, a subtle wariness that I didn't understand yet. He moved through the rooms methodically, taking notes, testing faucets, and examining the warped floors. I trailed behind him, half expecting him to give up on this hopeless wreck, but he didn't. He paused at the music box, glancing at it with a fleeting expression I couldn't read. "Your grandmother loved this place," he said softly, almost to himself. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "She did," I whispered, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. I realized the truth. My parents had stolen more than money. They had stolen trust, security, and the feeling of home itself. And now, alone in the quiet wreck of her house, I felt the first flicker of resolve. This wasn't the end of my story. The betrayal had cut deep, yes, but it had also awakened something in me, a spark that would not be extinguished. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a sliver of clarity amidst the grief. The house was a wreck, yes, but it was also a battlefield. And I, the wounded and betrayed, was ready to fight. The next morning the house felt even colder, as though it had absorbed my despair overnight and decided to show me no mercy. I woke to the groan of the old floorboards and the faint creak of a door swinging in the wind. The repairman was already there, kneeling beside a half-rotted floorboard in the hallway. He glanced up as I entered, eyes narrowed, expression unreadable. "You might want to see this," he said quietly, motioning toward a small cavity he had uncovered beneath the floor. Inside lay wires frayed and tangled, some apparently tampered with recently. I frowned. "Was this here before?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not by chance," he said. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of warning. "Someone's been inside recently." My stomach dropped. The betrayal of my parents had already carved a hollow ache in my chest, but this was different. Someone had invaded the sanctity of my grandmother's home, not just to take, but to sabotage. I felt my hands tremble as I crouched beside him, staring at the exposed wires. They were planning something, he continued, flipping a small flashlight over the tangled mess. This isn't normal wear and tear, it's deliberate, dangerous. Fear and anger collided inside me. Fear for my safety, anger for the audacity of my parents, who had already stolen everything but clearly wanted to go further. I realized I had underestimated just how far they were willing to go, and the sense of vulnerability that had kept me frozen since the funeral surged into a burning determination. The repairman sighed and leaned back on his heels. I called the police, he admitted, watching my reaction carefully. I froze, unable to speak. My heart hammered not with relief, but with the rush of a revelation I hadn't anticipated. I didn't want you to find out this way, he said, but this isn't just a repair job. If anyone else comes in here and gets hurt. His voice trailed, leaving the threat hanging in the air. I swallowed hard, the sting of betrayal twisting with a flicker of hope. For the first time since my grandmother's funeral, I felt a strange comfort in knowing someone was on my side. Not my parents, not the lawyer who had handed me the envelope like a verdict. I had an ally, someone who could see through the chaos and help me navigate it. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He shrugged, a shadow crossing his face. "Maybe because I've seen this before. People take what's not theirs, but someone has to stand up for the person who's left behind." He glanced around the house, taking in the sagging ceilings and peeling wallpaper. "Your grandmother loved this place. You should be able to have it, even if it's a wreck." The words resonated in me. For so long, I had felt powerless, crushed under the weight of my parents' greed and betrayal. Now, with him quietly supporting me, a seed of courage took root. I would not let them erase everything my grandmother had left me, not without a fight. Over the next few days, the repairman and I worked together, not just fixing the physical damage, but documenting it. He taught me to take photographs of tampered wiring, record the state of the floors, and note every irregularity. Each piece of evidence was a small victory, a tangible reminder that I was reclaiming my power, one careful step at a time. At night, alone in the dim light of the living room, I traced my grandmother's belongings with reverent fingers. The cracked photograph on the mantel, the chipped tea set in the cabinet, the music box that creaked like a heartbeat, they were more than things. They were proof of her life, her love, and now, my inheritance. Not the money my parents had stolen, but the memories, the legacy, the home she had built. And for the first time, amidst fear and anger, I felt the quiet stirrings of hope. The house was no longer just a wreck. It was the battleground, and I was ready to fight, not just for what had been stolen, but for the sense of justice my grandmother deserved. After the repairman's revelation, I could no longer pretend the house was just a dilapidated relic of my grandmother's life. Every creak of the floorboards, every splintered door, every dust-covered corner became a potential clue, a sign that my parents' betrayal ran deeper than I had feared. What had begun as grief had transformed into vigilance, a sharp awareness that I could no longer rely on anyone but myself and this quiet man who had chosen to stand with me. I began combing through every document I could find, utility bills, insurance papers, and letters my grandmother had left scattered in drawers. I discovered subtle signs of forgery, my parents' signatures in shaky ink, dates altered, and documents that didn't match official records. It was as though they had prepared for every eventuality, thinking I would never notice. My chest tightened with a mix of fury and disbelief. How could they betray me so completely? The same people who had fed me, clothed me, and said they loved me had reduced my inheritance to ashes, leaving me only with a rotting house and memories. But despair was no longer an option. I turned to the repairman, who had become a steady presence in the wreckage of my life. Together, we began cataloging everything. He showed me how to photograph tampered wiring, how to note inconsistencies in locks and doors, and even how to discreetly record movements within the house. Each piece of evidence was a small, quiet victory, a way to tip the scales back in my favor. As days passed, my parents grew bolder. They called, asking about the house, their tone falsely sweet, dripping with the assumption that I was powerless. I answered cautiously, revealing nothing, pretending ignorance while secretly documenting every interaction. Their lies became a map, a trail I could follow to uncover more of their deceit. I discovered that valuable heirlooms had been sold, some entrusted to distant acquaintances with promises never intended to be kept. Offshore accounts were hinted at in passing remarks, hidden behind layers of shell companies and false paperwork. They had thought they could erase me from my grandmother's life entirely. Late one evening, the repairman pulled me aside. "You need to be careful," he said, his voice low. "They're not just greedy. They're dangerous. Don't underestimate how far they'll go." I nodded, the weight of his warning pressing down on me. But I also felt something else, a surge of determination that made my fear shrink just a little. I had to be smart, yes, but I would not cower. We began to set small traps, figurative and literal. Hidden cameras in corners, photographs of tampered locks, and meticulous notes on every suspicious movement. Every time I saw evidence of their intrusion, anger burned brighter, but so did resolve. The betrayal that had left me broken was now fueling a plan, not just for justice, but for vindication. I also spent time in the house alone, wandering through the rooms my grandmother had loved, touching the furniture she had polished, the curtains she had sewed, the books she had read countless times. These small rituals reminded me why I had to fight, why I couldn't let my parents' greed erase her life. This was more than a house. It was a testament to her care, her love, her sacrifices, and I would honor it. At night, I reviewed everything we had gathered. Each photograph, each note, each irregularity became a weapon, a piece of armor against the people who had tried to destroy me. The house, once a symbol of loss, now felt like a fortress. My grandmother's spirit seemed to linger in the corners, in the shadows of her carefully arranged furniture, in the faint smell of her perfume that clung stubbornly to the air. I whispered promises to her, silently swearing that her life, her home, and her legacy would not be stolen. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel a strange, sweet satisfaction, a sense that the scales were shifting. The betrayal of my parents had created an opportunity. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was preparing to turn the tables, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and to expose the treachery that had left me reeling. The night fell heavy around the house, and I stood by the window, looking out at the overgrown garden, imagining the confrontation to come. Shadows danced in the corners, and for the first time I welcomed them. I was no longer alone. I had my plan, my evidence, and the quiet guidance of the repairman, who believed in me when no one else did. The stage was set, the next act was mine. The day they came back, I felt a quiet tension settle over the house like the calm before a storm. My parents arrived unannounced, their smiles too wide, their voices syrupy with false concern. They assumed the house was still vulnerable, that I was still powerless, that they had won. But they had underestimated the changes that had taken place. Not just in the house, but in me. I met them at the door, the repairman standing just behind me, silent but unwavering. The moment their eyes fell on him, the polite facade faltered. They hadn't expected an ally. They certainly hadn't expected that someone else had been watching, documenting, and preparing. "Everything okay here?" my mother asked, her voice overly sweet. "Better than okay," I said, letting the words hang. "We've been very thorough." I led them into the living room, casually gesturing toward the small cameras perched inconspicuously in the corners. My father's eyes flicked just for a moment, and I saw the expression of panic he thought he had hidden. I had waited for this moment for months, quietly collecting evidence, letting them believe they could manipulate me without consequence. The repairman stepped forward, holding a binder thick with photographs, notes, and documentation of their tampering. "We've documented everything," he said, his voice calm, almost clinical. "Locks, wiring, unauthorized entry, every illegal move you made to claim this property. The police have been informed." Their smiles vanished, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, my father's jaw tightened. They had thought they were clever, but we had outmaneuvered them. Every false signature, every tampered lock, every lie was now proof against them. What do you mean?" My father stammered, though I could see the fear creeping into his eyes.
I mean?
I said, stepping closer, that the house, my inheritance, and the life my grandmother built cannot be stolen from me. You've had your chance. You tried to cheat, to lie, to erase me. And now the truth is out. My parents' faces were pale, anger flashing across their features. But it was too late. The repairman reached for his phone, showing me that the police were on their way, ready to take the statements, document the evidence, and hold them accountable. For a moment, I felt a surge of triumph, so sweet it nearly overwhelmed the months of grief. Every sleepless night, every tear shed in the empty hallways of this house, every pang of betrayal had led to this, justice, finally served. I had been powerless once, but not anymore. They tried to argue, to threaten, but it was futile. The evidence was irrefutable, and the law now stood on my side. Their attempts to gaslight me backfired, revealing their desperation, their greed, and their contempt for the family they had betrayed. It was humiliating for them, exhilarating for me. When the police arrived, the confrontation was formal and clinical. Statements were taken, photographs catalogued, and legal measures initiated to reclaim what had been stolen. My parents were forced to admit their actions, facing the consequences they had ignored for so long. Their dominance, their assumed control, crumbled in front of my eyes, leaving nothing but the stark reality of their betrayal laid bare. After the police left, I walked through the house with the repairman, touching the furniture my grandmother had loved, looking at the photographs on the mantel, and listening to the faint creak of the floors beneath my feet. This house, once a ruin, now felt alive again, not because of the repairs, but because I had reclaimed it. Because I had honored my grandmother's legacy and stood up to the people who had tried to destroy it. I knew the ache of betrayal would linger, and the shadow of my parents' actions would always be a part of my story. But for the first time, I felt the quiet power of justice. The anger that had once consumed me had transformed into something far stronger: pride, resilience, and the knowledge that I would never allow anyone to take what was mine again. Standing in the sunlight streaming through the restored windows, I whispered a promise to my grandmother. "I'll protect this always. You're safe with me now." The house creaked gently, as if acknowledging her approval, and for the first time since her death, I felt a measure of peace. Betrayal had come, but so had justice, and in that sweet, quiet triumph, I discovered the strength I never knew I had.